What's up? What's going on? What's good? The boss is still shaking in, and usually have the midweek report that's for Wednesdays at 7:30. But I've been on the road hitting the gyms pretty much like nonstop over the past couple of days, so hadn't necessarily been able to stop and do a live midweek report. So I'm gonna just have this here to kind of talk about a few of the hot topics that are going around in the sport of boxing. Now, one of the things is Keyshawn Davis. He was on with Ariel Helwani on the Ariel Helwani Show, and we talked about the incident that happened that was scheduled for his fight card early June there at the Scope Arena in Norfolk. He was slated to defend the WBO lightweight title against Edwin De Los Santos, but as you know, he ended up in the weigh-in over 4 pounds overweight, and had a little bit of an idea that they would still go through with the fight, but the fight didn't happen. We kind of like explained the situation there, on the show, as far as like him, trying to have that event happen at the Scope Arena, Norfolk, homecoming event to defend the WBO lightweight title. But it just didn't quite work out and he couldn't get the weight down. We kind of like said that, in hindsight, maybe he should have just went ahead and moved up after winning the WBO lightweight title against Dennis Berinchek this February. It was February 14th at the theater at Madison Square Garden. And I pretty much like felt the same way. Seeing Keyshawn there against Dennis Berinchek, and I was like, after this fight, he should really go forward there in the lightweight division. But given that the plan was to build him up as they did in 2024 to get in position to fight for a world title in 2025, and then after that, culminate the plan with having him defend that title in his hometown of Norfolk. So we wanted to follow through with the plan as much as possible, but he just couldn't get the weight down there and just ended up being above 135 pounds. So on that front, he missed out on defending the title there at the Scope Arena in front of a hometown crowd. And that was one side of it. The other side of it, of course, was what happened after the fight between Kelvin Davis and Harold Albright. And Keyshawn also explained that particular situation. Y'all take it for what it is. All I know is that the incident outside of the locker room, that was absolutely crazy because he had his pretty much a newborn at the time, child out there, in a stroller and stuff like that, and you still had entourages and people within both parties still out there, scuffling and all that type of stuff. So that was like a crazy situation overall. But Keyshawn had explained what went down in the locker rooms there as far as like his side and everything like that. So y'all could take that for what he said. I know that when they're Albright has his side of the story. So I mean, y'all just decipher what has been said, and we just go forward with it. With Nahir Albright, he kind of like bygones. Well, I wouldn't say bygones be bygones, but he really like had the situation be over the top or something like that. Really immediately after the fight. So I mean, it's gonna kind of like linger over here for a little bit, but I'd say that it's gonna go past. And with Nahir Albright and his side, he said that one, that he could have a fight with Kelvin again, or he could have a fight with Keyshawn again. Really doesn't matter to him. But to have Keyshawn basically have what I would say like first public appearance since what happened over in Norfolk Scope Arena, that was something there on the Ariel Helwani Show. And next up, we're going to talk about this little situation. Y'all know where I'm basically based in the DC area, okay? And there was a recent post by the former WBC featherweight champion, Mr. Gary Russell Jr., that was directed at the current WBA super featherweight champion, Lamont Roach Jr. Now, there's been a good amount of back and forth between those two fighters. Of course, both of them around the DC area. Okay. Now, with Lamont Roach Jr., we had his fight on March 1st against Gervonta Tank Davis, Barclays Center. Ended up in a majority draw, and people were looking forward to seeing if there was going to be a rematch. And hey, here we are. It's August, and well, you haven't had any type of update in reference to a rematch. I did have a conversation with Lamont Roach Sr., of course, father and trainer of Lamont Roach Jr., and we kind of like went through the whole little situation himself. We're gonna have a video on that here posted on the channel real soon. But given that situation, one, got to figure out what's going to be going on with Tank Davis at this particular juncture. And once that's pretty much been clarified, then Lamont Roach Jr. will be able to move forward, whether it's a rematch with Tank Davis or a fight with someone else. Now, he did make it clear, pretty much clear, that he does want to fight again this year. Now, would it be against Gary Russell Jr.? Yeah, I'm not too sure about all that. I know that Gary Russell Jr. did have a fight there on July 19th, pretty much getting back in the ring. He weighed in at around 131 pounds, and said that he wants to compete around that lightweight or super featherweight division. Now, can't necessarily say what's going on with the WBA title at super featherweight right now. You do have Lamont Roach Jr. as the world champion, and there is an interim champion, but that particular situation, the WBA would have to figure that out, and see if Lamont Roach Jr. would have to have a defense against the interim champion, or maybe they had something else there that could say, all right, he doesn't necessarily have to face the interim champion there, and that could open the door potentially for a fight with Gary Russell Jr., but that still, is a long ways away. At least I would say it is. So we have to see how that goes. Either, like I said, Lamont Roach Jr. versus Gary Russell Jr., or if they're still able to work out a deal to have a rematch with Tank Davis. Now, of course, with seeing that Tank Davis could potentially face another opponent that could be an exhibition, I really don't want to go further into that detail. But we'll see, I guess, within the coming weeks or next month or something like that, what is going to go down with that situation with Tank Davis and Lamont Roach Jr. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on here is in reference to the former unified welterweight champion, Boots Ennis, IBF welterweight champion, WBA super champion at welterweight, after his win against Iman Stanionis on April 12th of this year in Atlantic City. Of course, we had the announcement of him going up to 154 pounds, and then it's been a buzz as far as like, okay, who's he going to fight at 154 pounds? There have been a number of names that have been thrown out there. Josh Kelly is one of them. We've had Luis Malima, who is the IBO champion at 154 pounds. He has recently been added to the rankings there for the WBA at 154. I think he's at number 10, and they have Keyshawn Ennis at number 2 in the WBA rankings right now. We've also had maybe a Rashidi Ellis mentioned, or Andres Casarakis, undefeated contender there, of course, that won the OTX 154-pound tournament with his win over Brandon Adams in the finals. There's been a couple of other fighters that have been mentioned as potential opponents there for Boots Ennis, but we're just anticipating to see, okay, who is going to be that opponent for him later this year. Now, there's been kind of like some words buzzing around that they could have a fight in October over in Philadelphia. Now, with that being the case, that would kind of limit the potential opponents that Boots Ennis could have, at least on my take, because that kind of like could control the overall budget that they would have for having Boots Ennis there's a headlining bout or headlining fighter, and then have whoever would be his opponent. For example, if it was someone like Jesus Ramos, right? Would y'all think that Jesus Ramos would be able to go over to Philadelphia and have a fight with Boots Ennis when, let's say, it could be much bigger in like Vegas? So that kind of nixes like potential bout between Boots Ennis and a Jesus Ramos Jr. Right? Who else I could come up with? Like some would say like a Virgil Ortiz, or maybe like a Bakram Rosali of the IBF champion there. So that kind of like wouldn't necessarily be possible in a sense because of how much those fighters could potentially ask for. They mentioned the thing there with Josh Kelly. Like Josh Kelly, has been involved in multiple bouts on the Riyadh season. Like for example, last year at Wembley Stadium in September. Of course, that was headlined by Joshua versus Dubois. So Josh Kelly has been involved in Riyadh season events and have had like pretty good purses for those fights. Then being a B-side here in, let's say, Wells Fargo Arena, that ain't necessarily gonna be possible in a sense. So they kind of like, as I said before, limits the options that Boots Ennis may have there to have a fight, let's say at Wells Fargo there in October or whatever date that could be available there in that venue, right? But a number of fight fans are anticipating it, and we got to see like what ends up being the case here for Jerron Boots Ennis. Now, that's a quick rundown there. Like I said, a lot of activity, here through the Boxing Source channel. Number of interviews, a number of shows and things like that. Still have more interviews to post. Still have more interviews scheduled. So continue to follow the channel. Trying to get up to 3,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and then from 3,000 to 4,000, 4,000 to 5,000, and then also build up what's going down on Rumble as well. So we appreciate the support here at the Boxing Source, and we'll catch y'all later. Peace.